Cool. Now let's chat about AI programming. One of the first things that I do want to mention about AI programming is the fact that if your first game is okay with not having AI, you should probably go without AI. And it's not because AI is particularly hard. I mean, it is super hard, but part of the reason why I mentioned that is that having AIs actually make it very difficult to debug because there are just certain behaviors and traits that you can't fully predict or when it will manifest. And it's something that I kind of have been trying to wrangle with as I was making the game. I really love characters, and so I have a natural tendency to be let's put in some guardian, let's put in some guest. And there are certain nuances with the guards that I had to really figure out. I used the behavior tree system in Unreal to kind of branch off and design what kind of behaviors they have to do. One of the things that I personally struggled with the most was to keep track of what they call a blackboard key. And those are actually parameters that are nested within the the AI system that you can call upon based on different operations that you want to do in the blueprint. And what I find is that actually keeping track of when you sense the things, how you keep track of things, it still feels like a little bit of a black box. So when I have a couple of different issues that interlinks with the AI, it definitely takes me a lot longer time to debug. One of the really good tools that I use is if you press play and you press on the tilde key, you can basically have access to the AI perceptions as well as the parameters. And it's super helpful to break down to see is my AI actually able to see my characters? If it is, but it's still not performing certain things, it helps you to kind of debug what are some of the issues associated with it. And the second thing that I kind of learned is that having one AI obviously takes a lot of time to set up, but when you have multiple AIs of the same type, it is extremely difficult to kind of tease out the issues. And I spent quite a decent chunk of time refactoring my AI code because I got to a point where I was okay, great, this AI works really well for my level. And then I go into a different map set based on my procedural environment. And I realized actually now instead of having one AI guard, I have 3 AI guards and they're all interacting in a way that doesn't make a lot of sense. So that kind of lead me onto this path where I was I could either do it with just one guard or I can have 3 guards or more, enabling the 1+ guard situation. And I ended up being a little bit ambitious and I was I'm gonna try and see if I could do it. And thankfully it was kind of successful. Obviously, as you play the game, you will probably see more bugs that I personally could experience. But it was relatively successful. It took some time to kind of refactor the code of the AI and the behavior tree. But at the end, I actually think that it ended up to be much more clean and elegant. And that's something that is super meaningful for me because I think what the AI did was that it added a spiciness to the gameplay. There's a lot of things that you can't predict, and there's a lot of things that nuances that makes the fun more dynamic, and I really, really enjoy that. And I hopefully later on, if I do pursue more AI related stuff, I think I will be better practice in terms of actually how to set up the behavior trees in the AI. Okay, let's chat about music. And I was very, very fortunate in a way that I had Marcus Alonso as a collaborator for the audio experience of Lucid Heist. And, I think one of the big things that I was very excited about since trying to make a game is actually to learn about dynamic music experiences. And we tried out quite a few different directions and things like that. So, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so one thing we really liked about the game, the Lucid Heist, is the fact that the levels are generated procedurally. And we thought that maybe having procedurally generated music would fit the game very well. So we looked around, we did a little bit of research on how to do it. And we found this website that we really like called Jazz Keys, where as you press keys on the keyboard, it plays some piano notes. And it sounds really well. So we thought that we could do something similar for the game. So what we did, we recorded some notes on the piano. Agatha played some notes on the piano, in a jazz scale. We did a little bit of research on what kind of scales are used for jazz music, and once we have those notes recorded, we load it into the game, and we tried different ways to play those notes, inspired by the Jazz Keys app.
Yeah, it was actually super helpful because obviously someone who's not super familiar with music and audio, having Marcos there to kind of like just like kind of break down like kind of roughly what they did was super helpful, so that I can go into Unreal, into Blueprint to hook up some of the logics of like, oh, like at this point like we should be playing these slices of notes and then like how we sequence them. So we ended up coming up with some pretty cool ways to express these dynamic music with the tempo of this kind of like note playing, where you know if you have if you're chasing down a guard, or you're being chased down by a guard, or you just picked up the art, the tempo would change.
Yeah, so we tried having this system working with like three different levels of complexity that adapted to the game in real time. But after playing the game a few times, we realized that the jazz theme musical didn't really the musical jazz theme didn't really match the dreamy or dreamlike theme of the game. So we try to go in a completely different direction. And so for that, I made a very simple song with the OPZ, which is a pretty cool synthesizer from Teenage Engineering. So I made a very simple song that has 3 layers that can be turned on and off. And so we loaded those in the game, and the game is procedurally fitting in and out the different tracks of the song based on the action of the game.
Yeah, and that was actually really it became very expressive in a way where it's like there's a layers of complexity that you can play in with the different notes and melodies. And I think that like based on like, you know, whatever state the player is in, the track kind of changes and morphs. And I think that's something that like I really personally really enjoy from Nintendo. Like they kind of do that kind of practice a lot, so it was kind of nice to actually be able to execute it and see how it unfolds. And yeah.
So that worked very well too for the music part. And then there were other parts of the game that require some sounds, so we made a few sounds. We even recorded our voices for the characters, and we also there's this anchor that is reading the news at some point in the game, and we're looking for a voice that looked like it was coming from some kind of alien.
Yeah.
So you can tell it's a voice, but it's not a human that is talking.
Yeah.
So, well, you recorded your voice.
Yeah, so the original intention was that I decided to record and narrate the kind of subtitle that's going on to explain the situation. And I was trying to do it very simplistically in Audition, where I was going to do a pitch shift. But Marcos kind of saw what I was doing, and he had obviously far better ideas than I have. So he kind of took that on, and he tried out different kind of applications to see how we can change the voice, actually.
Yeah, so I had tried different things. One of the first things I tried was using a granular synthesizer. I used this app called Borderlands Granular, because I thought that maybe moving like bits of the sound forward and backwards would help with keep this sense of that it's an actual voice, but it's not recognizable. But and we tried many different parameters with the app, and we played with it a lot. But the effect was a little too aggressive, and it was hard to recognize it as a voice anymore. So it was a little too distractive. So we decided to go on a simpler route in the end. And we ended up using this app called Sampler on the iPad, and it in the end it's kind of a simple effect where we just pitch shift the sound and then add some modulation and distortion, and I think we're very happy with the results.
Yeah, it was really cool, and I think that there's a lot of opportunity there to kind of utilize Sampler for this kind of voice distortion in the future for games, especially if there's like more dialogues that has to be recorded. Like I feel like that's a really fast way to be able to kind of create more of these kinds of like indistinguishable language speaking creatures, which obviously can be very taxing from a production standpoint. So this pipeline actually worked out really well for us, which is super cool. And yeah,